Welcome, one and all, to the High Pressure Podcast. My name is Jeff Beamish, air quality meteorologist at Spheros Environmental, formerly Sonoma Technology. New company name, but the same fellow forecasting colleague, Steve Irwin, fellow air quality meteorologist, and Patrick Zahn, our fearless leader for the air quality forecasting program here at Spheros. So we're back to podcasting, and we're also back to ozone season. Yes, we have reached the time of year when longer days, warm temperatures, and emissions from cars and industry all combine to create ground level ozone, which can be harmful to your health. And in Sacramento, they have a program that is aimed not only to protect public health, but also to minimize ways that you could actually be impacting the air quality during these hot summer months. It's called the Spare the Air program. We'll talk about the history of Spare the Air. We're also going to talk about our role here at Spheros Environmental, how we contribute to the Spare the Air program, and we'll also talk about some of the meteorological conditions we look for when forecasting ground level ozone in the Sacramento region. First, though, let's start with the history of Spare the Air. Patrick, you are our longest tenured meteorologist of the three of us. Tell us about how far back the Spare the Air program has gone and really what the ultimate goal is for Spare the Air.
Thanks, Jeff, and happy ozone season, like you said. Well, Sacramento's Spare the Air program actually began in 1995, and Sonoma Technology, now Spheros, actually got involved really at ground level in that program. At first, we were providing ozone mapping services for Sacramento, and then we started forecasting for these Spare the Air days. So our daily ozone forecasts do directly impact that program. And the Spare the Air program runs from May 1st through October 31st. A big reason for that is the meteorology during that period. And we're going to talk about that more later, but it is during the summer and early fall months. So I do want to talk about why there is a Spare the Air program. And the main thing to mention is that Sacramento is what we call out of attainment of the federal ozone standard. So there are these annual standards for ozone levels in every region in the US. And if a particular area doesn't meet that standard, then there are certain actions that they have to take. And this forecast program is in response to their being out of attainment. So, Jeff, you briefly mentioned the objectives of this program, and I just wanted to reiterate. Firstly, it's to increase awareness of potentially harmful air quality conditions. So there are ways to get information about the air quality conditions. People can subscribe to get daily forecasts, and they can learn when is it forecast to be poor air quality, either today or tomorrow or later in the week. And that can affect how people go about their lives. You know, if it could affect their levels of activity outside. It's really just about increasing awareness and helping protect public health. But in addition to that, as you mentioned, the public can take specific actions to reduce emissions and, in a way, hopefully prevent ozone levels from getting too high. So one main way that we can do that is by reducing driving or ride sharing. And in that way, we reduce what we call ozone precursor emissions. I think we'll talk a little bit about how ozone is formed, but there are these ozone precursors that can be emitted, and if you can reduce those, ultimately you can reduce the ozone levels on a given day.
And I should point out too here, Patrick, and that's great. Thanks for the background on it. That if you go to sparetheair.com, they do list out ways that you can take action to reduce those emissions, reduce those ozone precursors. It really is not hyperbole. Every little thing that you can do to reduce your emissions goes a long way to making really better air quality in the Sacramento region during these summer months. So let's bring Steve into the conversation here. And Steve, let's talk about the AQI value that us meteorologists here at Spheros, when forecasting for the Sacramento region, what AQI value we're looking for ozone during the summer months, and also other ways that we support the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality District during the summer months during Spare the Air season.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so Spare the Air days are based on forecast ozone concentrations, and it's actually the maximum daily 8-hour average ozone concentration. So it's not just one high hour of ozone that will issue an alert for. It has to be an expected series of hours of high AQI levels due to ozone. For the Sacramento region, that gets issued for AQI levels at or above 126. That's in the unhealthy for sensitive groups category. And that relates to a maximum daily 8-hour average of 78 parts per billion by volume or higher than that. And so, it is a forecast mechanism. It's not something that's based on what's currently happening. We're looking at the next day to see if all of the conditions are going to come together to create a consistently high ozone value that folks will need to start planning their outdoor activities around, and also potentially being able to reduce their impacts to how high those ozone concentrations could get. And so these are based on forecasts. We here at Spheros issue those forecasts out to 5 days in advance. The alerts don't get issued out that far, but we are always looking ahead to see which days could potentially go high, and communicating with the local air agency so that they know what to plan for each week. So we issue out to 5 days in advance, and then we also offer air quality discussions around what are the primary mechanisms that are forming ozone in the forecast, and that is over the next 3 days. So we have the outlook, and then we also have a few more details that we add in over the next few days just to see, what's happening in the weather, what's happening otherwise that could potentially produce those higher ozone values.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're going to bridge now into the next topic, exactly how we are forecasting ozone in the Sacramento region, because there are plenty of things, plenty of elements that we look at and that go into an air quality forecast. And really, on the whole, there's a lot that goes into an air quality forecast, whether you're forecasting for ozone or PM 2.5 or PM 10 for dust, like we do for our Imperial Valley client down in southeastern California. But one of the main things we look for in the Sacramento region when forecasting ozone is the presence of high pressure at the upper levels of the atmosphere, because what that does is reduce mixing vertically in the atmosphere. So when you have reduced turnover in the vertical levels of the atmosphere, a lot of those pollutants and those ozone precursors, they become a little more shunted into the lower levels of the atmosphere, making it more conducive for ground level ozone formation. On top of that, I alluded to this during the introduction. We have longer days during the summer months. We have hotter temperatures during the summer months, and also the presence of sunny skies. All those things combining with those ozone precursors, emissions from cars and industry, to develop ground level ozone formation. There's a wind component to this as well. The surface winds and the way that they kind of play out is really unique to the Sacramento region. Patrick, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to let you chime in here. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jeff. So before
Yeah.
we dive into winds, I wanted to follow up on your comment about the upper level ridge, because it
Yeah.
really has a dual impact. Not only does it reduce mixing, like you mentioned, but it also directly contributes to the sunny skies and the warmer temperatures that are also conducive to ozone formation. So it's kind of a double whammy with an upper level ridge, and we are definitely on the lookout for that pattern during the summer.
Yeah, I mean, think of it as sort of like the full court press in the atmosphere with upper level high pressure. Basically, you have convergence at the upper levels of the atmosphere, pushing air downward, reducing that vertical mixing. And it's hard to get clouds to try to build up, because clouds, they want to rise through the atmosphere. When they're meeting that resistance, they have a hard time doing it. That's why it becomes sunny and hot, typically with upper level high pressure in and around Northern California. So, should we talk about winds now? I would like to talk
Please,
about winds.
yes.
Yes, let's do that, because it's really unique to the Sacramento region. And please chime in as we discuss this here, because in Sacramento, they get a bit of a sea breeze effect from the Pacific. What happens during the summer months is that the land in the Sacramento Valley heats up a lot quicker than the ocean. Common sense says, well, yeah, of course that happens. But because of that difference between the heating of the land and the cooler ocean, you get this onshore breeze called the Delta breeze that develops and pushes into the Sacramento region during the latter portion of the afternoon and into the evening hours. Now, that Delta breeze, it can vary in speed, but what we're looking for those high AQI days, for Spare the Air days, is a very light Delta breeze going through Yolo, Solano counties into Sacramento proper, and then basically stopping once it gets to the foothills of the Sierra, the higher terrain, kind of blocking that low level flow, which then leads to where the highest AQI values typically occur during the summer months. So I'll turn it over to you guys. Let's talk about, the areas that we're looking for when forecasting. What are typically the places that see the highest ozone levels during the summer?
Well, before we dive into that, there was one other comment I wanted to make
Yeah.
on the Delta breeze, and that is because it's flowing through the San Francisco Bay Area, through the Delta into Sacramento, it's basically following what I would call an emissions corridor, which means that air mass is just picking up emissions from the Bay Area and along a populated corridor heading into Sacramento and then through Sacramento, like you mentioned, into the foothills. So it's really like an ideal situation in terms of wind, transport, and pollutant accumulation to then eventually lead to high ozone levels. But now, yes, back to where we see the highest ozone levels. As you mentioned, it can often be on the downwind side of that delta breeze. So if it's in Sacramento County, often we'll see it on the northeastern edge, so maybe in Folsom. But then oftentimes the pollutants, both ozone precursors and ozone itself, can get transported further into the Sierra foothills. And I wanted to mention at this point that when we issue a forecast for the Sacramento region, it's actually for the 5-county area. So that's El Dorado, Placer, Sacramento, Yolo, and Solano counties. So we're trying to factor in ozone levels in that entire region. And if there are going to be high ozone levels in any portion of it, then we will issue a Spare the Air alert.
Yeah, Patrick, it is really interesting to watch, the ozone values in the Sacramento region where maybe early in the afternoon they'll start to build right over the center of Sacramento, but then as that sea breeze kicks in during the afternoon and evening, the high values get transported uphill up into the Sierra foothills, and we see those higher concentrations, which can actually linger into the evening hours. And I think some of that, you can correct me on this, but I think some of that's due to less titration of the ozone occurring up in the foothills in the evening. There isn't the titration from traffic or the other urban sources to kind of reduce ozone in the evening up in the foothills. So once it gets transported there, it can actually linger pretty long during the evening hours.
Absolutely, Steve. So sometimes we can see the highest concentrations, not just in the foothills, but late into the night, 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. And that's not a usual time that we think of when we're talking about high ozone, but this region is kind of unique, and it is a really interesting area, and it is a really interesting area to forecast for that reason.
Yeah, it certainly is. And maybe some folks, are following the AQI during the summer months and they're logging on to their Air Now app, or they're going to sparetheair.com to check the current conditions. And, 8, 9 o'clock at night, and, you're in Colfax or you're in Auburn and it's still over 100 AQI, and you're wondering, well, hold on a minute. High Pressure Podcast told me you need sunshine, longer days, warmer temperatures. But yeah, it's that titration, it's that transport path that even when the sun is going down can maintain those high ozone values into the Sierra foothills. One other very important factor when it comes to ozone development, this is something we track on a daily basis during the summer months because it's so important to air quality, is smoke from wildfires. Obviously, smoke, wildfires, that increases air pollution, increases that AQI. But if there's just the right amount of smoke where it's not too thick, where it's blocking the sunlight, smoke can, and its associated ozone precursors, can enhance ozone production and lead to those high AQI values for ozone in the Sacramento region. So I actually ran the numbers on the number of Spare the Air days that have occurred in the Sacramento region going back to 2011, and then seeing how many of those days rather had smoke on those Spare the Air days. Overall, since 2011, half of the Spare the Air days in the Sacramento region have had a smoke influence. But since 2016, guys, over 70% of observed Spare the Air days, 126 AQI and higher for ozone, had smoke involved. A huge X factor when it comes to forecasting ozone in the Sacramento region.
Yeah, and just to comment on that, so when we're learning how to forecast, we try to really educate ourselves on what I would call the rules of thumb. And we basically talked about those earlier. The general rules of thumb of when do you normally expect high ozone? Like we said, the upper level ridge of high pressure, high temperatures, sunny skies. Well, when you introduce smoke into the mix, it can really just you might end up throwing all those rules of thumb away because, like you said, depending on how thick the smoke is, it can really enhance ozone formation. It might increase the 8-hour average concentration by 20 plus ppb, which could take you from what would have been maybe a moderate ozone day all the way into the unhealthy for sensitive groups range. And so it really does add an extra challenge to the forecast. Not only are we looking for these the normal meteorological conditions that would lead to high ozone, but we've got to be tracking fire behavior, smoke production, smoke transport, smoke accumulation in the lower levels of the atmosphere in the Sacramento region. In some cases, that smoke can be transported hundreds or even thousands of miles.
Yeah.
So like I said, it's an added challenge. And like you said, it can't be too thick. So that's another trick. If the smoke is too thick, it'll actually block the sunlight. And then you'll have reduced ozone formation. So there's a happy medium, really not that happy, because it's leading to poor air quality conditions.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
called a
another,
medium. It's a
There we
medium.
go.
Steve, go ahead.
I think another interesting aspect is that the interplay of those things. So we have the delta breeze coming in, and then we may have smoke that's being produced up in the Sierras at a higher elevation. And that for me is when it kind of turns into the Super Bowl of air quality forecasting. It's like there may be a very thin layer next to the surface all the way across Sacramento where it's cooler. You're not getting as much sun because the smoke aloft is maybe a little bit thicker. And then up in the foothills, the smoke is right at the surface. They're getting more sunshine. So you may have a huge gradient from lower ozone right in the Sacramento Valley to much higher ozone in the foothills. So we're looking around not just at air quality monitors, but we're looking at regional cameras to see what elevation is the smoke at? Where is it going to hit one of the monitored locations? Or is it going to stay just above everything and it ends up being good because this sea breeze has come on shore?
Yep.
So there's so many complexities with smoke, with the delta breeze, with the terrain that make it a great challenge and I think something we all enjoy.
Just a moment of levity, really, really quick. So during ozone season, we have this GIF, all right? We have this GIF from Wedding Crashers where they're really excited about wedding season. We have one that says it's ozone season because we, as air quality meteorologists, this is our big time of year talking about air quality. But I want to go back to something that you just said. What did you call it? The Super Bowl of air quality forecasting?
Super Bowl of air quality forecasting, yes.
So you've now created a new GIF for the group here. So congratulations. We just got to figure out what the halftime show is for this. Is it the Alert California cameras? Is it the hourly AQI that pops up on airnow.gov?
Yeah, it could be. I compare it to other places I've forecasted, out in the Central Plains or the Northern Plains where everything can be just focused on those very few parameters, those rules of thumb that you were talking about, Patrick, earlier, and it's a little bit easier to track. But when you bring in the terrain, the ocean being in close proximity, multiple locations that wildfire smoke can come into the valley, it's just it's a huge challenge, and we learn each year, I think, how to do it even better. So.
Yeah, we do. And there's also policy implications as well in the Sacramento region, too, what our forecasts do. And I want to point out as well, when there is smoke, and now this is turning into the smoke podcast here, but when there is smoke during Spare the Air season, if we expect PM 2.5 AQI levels to be high, the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality District will reach out to us and say, hey, let's go ahead and add PM 2.5 forecasts in as well. And we are more than happy to do that to protect public health and to make sure people are avoiding the worst air quality during the days.
Yeah, Jeff, that's right. Even though it is ozone season, depending on the day, depending on the fire and smoke situation, it can quickly shift right back to PM season because the dominant pollutant in that smoke may be PM 2.5. Steve, I wanted to follow up on one comment you made about trying to ascertain the vertical level of the smoke. Like, how high up in the atmosphere is it? Will it be at the surface? Well, it can be at different levels, at different locations in the Sacramento region, and you can have multiple layers of smoke. So it can be extra complicated. And on top of that, you might have a loft smoke that gets mixed down to the surface, or you might have a loft smoke that's above the inversion, so the inversion actually helps keep the smoke away from the surface. It's incredibly complex, and luckily we do have some pretty reliable air quality models that help predict and model the three-dimensional dynamics of the atmosphere, and they include smoke transport in them. But on top of that, we also have statistical tools that we've developed for the Sacramento region, also incorporating smoke. So we do have a lot of instruments, tools at our disposal to help with these forecasts, but I will say they remain very challenging.
Yep, every season's kind of different, isn't it? You have the year like 2020 when we had all of the wildfires, the lightning-caused wildfires that were around Northern California that created a huge challenge for forecasting. And you have your quieter years as well, or you have a year where there's one fire in the Sierra Nevada range that's trickling smoke into the Sacramento region. They're all a little bit different, aren't they?
Every day is different. Yep.
Well, that wraps it up for our discussion on the Spare the Air program in the Sacramento region and how we forecast ozone there for the Sacramento Valley. In our next podcast, we're going to give you the seasonal weather outlook as far as temperatures and how it may relate to ozone production and perhaps wildfire activity across Northern California. Check that out in the coming weeks. If you want to stay abreast to the air quality conditions in the Sacramento region, get the air quality forecast, go to sparetheair.com. If you want to track some of the current air quality conditions, one of the great ways to do that, especially during those later months in the summer when wildfire season starts creeping up, airnow.gov gives you your ozone and PM 2.5 AQI current levels. The AirNow fire and smoke map as well will give you the latest on smoke conditions. That's fire.airnow.gov. To see some of the amazing work that we do here at Spheros Environmental, please visit our website, spherosenv.com. I'm Jeff Beamish.
I'm Patrick Zahn.
And I'm Steve Irwin.
Thanks for listening to the High Pressure Podcast.